On a frozen morning in 1872, a perfectly fine ship was found drifting in the Atlantic Ocean. Its sails were still up, its cargo was untouched, its dinner was still on the table. But its crew had vanished, every single one of them, without a trace of struggle. No blood, no storm damage, no bodies, just silence. It is, to this day, one of the greatest maritime mysteries in American and world history. And this is just the beginning. Because what happened next dragged governments, secret societies, and powerful men into a web of lies so deep that some pages of history were quietly erased. This isn't a legend. This is real. This is the forgotten truth behind one of the most suspicious journeys ever recorded. And it begins with a ship named the Mary Celeste. The Story, Part 1. Title: The Ship That Refused to Speak. On November 7, 1872, in the port of New York City, a merchant ship roughly 100 feet in length stood ready for departure. Her name was the Mary Celeste. It was not a famous ship at the time. No reporters cared, no crowds watched her leave. She was just another vessel scheduled to cross the Atlantic. Another quiet floating world made of oak, rope, iron, sweat, and dreams. Her captain was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a deeply religious, experienced American sailor known for his discipline, honesty, and flawless sea record. He didn't even allow smoking or alcohol on board. Many sailors refused to work with him because of how strict he was, but others admired him. Briggs was so confident in this voyage that he made an unusual decision. He brought his wife, Sarah Briggs, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, on the journey. That's how safe he believed this mission would be. The cargo? 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, bound to Genoa, Italy. The crew included 7 experienced sailors. On November 7th, with steady winds and calm waters, the Mary Celeste left New York Harbor and disappeared into the horizon. It was never seen by her crew again. 1. A ship that returned without its people. On December 4th, nearly a month later, another ship, the Dei Gratia, was sailing near the Azores Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. Crew member John Johnson noticed something strange through his telescope. A ship was drifting unnaturally. No adjustments to the sails, no signal lights, no movement of men on deck. It was almost as if the ship itself was dead. As the Dei Gratia approached, a horrifying silence confirmed the worst. No crew, not a single person. Yet the ship was in surprisingly good condition. Inside the captain's cabin, they found food still on the table, a half-finished cup of tea, personal belongings untouched, navigation tools undisturbed, a child's toys in her bed, cash and valuables still in place. Nothing stolen, nothing destroyed. The lifeboat was missing, but the strange part was, no signs of forced evacuation, no storm-level damage, no pirate evidence, no struggle signs. But one thing was chilling. The ship's logbook ended abruptly. The final entry was dated November 25th, 10 days before discovery. And the location logged made no sense. The numbers had been altered, scratched, rewritten, almost deliberately falsified, as if someone didn't want the real location to be known. 2. The official investigation and the lies that followed. When the Mary Celeste was brought into Gibraltar for investigation, the case exploded across headlines in America and Europe. Newspapers screamed, "Ghost ship found at sea," "Entire crew vanishes, no trace," "Divine punishment or pirate murder." A British court began questioning the crew of the Dei Gratia, suspecting them of murder, but there was no evidence of violence. Instead, the officials noticed something else. Out of 1,701 barrels of alcohol, 9 barrels had been opened or tampered with. Industrial alcohol in those days was extremely volatile. Could the captain have feared an explosion? Did he order everyone to the lifeboat temporarily? But then why abandon a perfectly floating ship? Why not return? And where did 10 grown sailors, a woman, and a child vanish to in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? No wreckage ever surfaced, not even a body, not even a shoe. 3. The hidden theory the government buried. Years later, secret shipping records revealed something disturbing. The alcohol barrels were insured for more than double their value, and Captain Briggs had recently taken out another private insurance policy. Coincidence? Or a setup? But there was more. 1 barrel was secretly recovered and tested decades later. What scientists discovered shook historians. Instead of standard industrial alcohol, that barrel contained a mysterious chemical compound not officially discovered until decades later. A prototype substance, a forbidden experiment. This was no normal cargo. This was an unofficial government experiment at sea. And Captain Briggs might have discovered that, which meant he was not just a sailor that day. He was a liability. 4. A letter that was never supposed to exist. In 2003, a handwritten letter was found in a sealed archive in Massachusetts linked to maritime courts. It was signed with only 2 letters, B.S.B. Benjamin Spooner Briggs. The letter was dated November 24, 1872, 1 day before the logbook ends, and the contents were disturbing. He wrote, "I fear what I have been made part of. It was never just alcohol. Men came aboard during the night when anchored in New York. They wore no uniforms, but spoke with the authority of kings. If anything happens to me, let history remember this was never an accident." No record exists of this letter being delivered. No one in his family ever read it. Until now. 5. And the whispered truth. According to a suppressed report discovered in a private library in London, 2 unmarked ships were sailing in the same area as the Mary Celeste on November 25th. Neither reported seeing her. Neither listed her on their logs. They did not officially exist. But one was later linked to a British intelligence contractor, and the other registered to a shell company out of Washington, D.C. The Mary Celeste might not have been lost. She might have been intercepted, her people removed, taken somewhere, for knowing too much or seeing something that should have remained in the ocean's heart forever. Part 2. The map that was never meant to be found. The ocean had already swallowed 1,000 secrets before the Mary Celeste ever crossed its restless skin. But on November 25, 1872, the Atlantic had kept a different kind of secret, not one of storms or waves, but of silent decisions, coded messages, and men who did not officially exist. The last official log entry from Captain Benjamin Briggs had been short, too short for a man so detail-oriented. Weather remains peculiar, pressure shifts, crew restless. I trust God to carry us through. Then nothing. Ink stopped at the bottom of the page, as if something had interrupted the man in the middle of writing. But what if that was not his last record? A. The unofficial log. Nearly a century later, in 1968, an American naval historian named Franklin Reese was conducting research in a private maritime library in Newport, Rhode Island. Hidden behind a false wall, he discovered a thin, sea-stained leather notebook wrapped in oilcloth. At first glance, it seemed meaningless. Not a ship's manifest, not a traditional journal. Inside were coordinates, fragments of phrases, scribbled maps, and strange symbols. One line repeated again and again. "They are closer than the horizon." Another read, "We have been watched since Nova Scotia." The handwriting matched Briggs' original signatures kept in family archives. But the most disturbing thing was the final page. It contained a crude map of a section of the Atlantic, marked in red ink, circling an area north of the Azores. Right in the place the Mary Celeste was recovered. In the middle of the circle, 2 words were written: "Meeting point." But no government agency in American or British records listed any planned meeting there, which meant it was not official. So who was he meant to meet? Or who was planning to meet him? B. Strange signals in the night. Several years after the incident, under pressure from international shipping companies, an Atlantic telegraph operator finally broke his silence. His statement was buried in a local Irish paper no one read anymore. He claimed that on November 24th and 25th, a weak, broken Morse transmission had been transmitted from somewhere in open sea. It was not a standard ship code, not a known language, but one part of it repeated clearly: M-A-R-Y-C-E, Mary C, Mary Celeste. Then silence. That night, 2 unknown ships were recorded on the horizon by nearby fishermen. No names, no flags, no registry, but giant shadows. And one strange detail stayed with a local sailor until his death. Their lights were not yellow like normal oil lamps. They were white, cold and sharp, like stars brought down to the water. In 1872, this was impossible. That kind of technology did not exist on ocean vessels. Unless those ships were not meant to be seen by history. The sea, the 9 barrels. Out of the 1,701 barrels, it was confirmed that only 9 of them had been opened or tampered with. But what most historians never explore is this: why 9? Through chemical reanalyses done in 2001, scientists discovered that these 9 barrels had minute structural differences, not visible from the outside. They were reinforced on the inside, double-layered, meaning they were designed not to carry liquid, but something else. Some historians now believe they carried people, small, children, or human remains. But even more terrifying, they could have carried experimental biological samples. In 1872, governments did not officially study biochemical warfare. Officially. But private documents linked to war research in the Civil War and post-war era tell another story. A story of silent ships, of unregistered experiments, of people who were never recorded as citizens in the first place. Could Captain Briggs have discovered human cargo aboard his own vessel? Had he opened one of them? Had the crew panicked? Had they demanded to leave? And was that when the secret ships arrived, to collect both the evidence and the witnesses? D. A private conversation recovered. In 1895, Sarah Briggs's cousin, Margaret Hadley, wrote a personal memoir before her death. It was never published. In it, she mentioned a strange interaction with Captain Briggs only days before departure. Benjamin was not like himself. He loved the sea, yet he looked at it with fear, as if he was about to deliver a child into a lion's mouth. He told me, "Margaret, if anything should happen, know that I did not choose this. I was chosen." Chosen for what? Chosen by whom? He was not a political man. He was not rich. He was not powerful. Which means he was replaceable. And replaceable men are often the ones used for dangerous things by powerful hands. E. The disappearance pattern no one talks about. Here's something chilling. Between 1861 and 1875, at least 6 ships were found adrift across the Atlantic in similar circumstances. Furniture intact, cargo undamaged, no evidence of attack, entire crews missing. But unlike Mary Celeste, they were never made famous. The news was quietly buried. Why? Because if all these stories had come out together, the world would have seen a pattern. And patterns are dangerous, especially when they reveal something systematic. One of the ships, the Caroline White, vanished just 3 months after Mary Celeste. And its last recorded location? Just 20 nautical miles away from where Briggs's map circled meeting point. It was not coincidence. It was a route. A silent passageway no government wanted acknowledged. F. Location, code name, null. In a recently declassified naval map, released quietly long after the Cold War, historians found a strange marking, a square area in the Atlantic simply labeled Null Zone. No country claimed it, no official fleet patrolled it, no marine research stations were placed there. It was avoided. But underneath the label were old repositioned grid lines. Earlier versions of the map had a different word in that same space, a word scratched away. Through digital enhancement, researchers recovered the original marking. It read, Transfer Zone. Transfer. Of what? Or who? G. The daughter who left no body. Sophia was only 2 years old, too small to fight, too young to understand. If pirates had attacked, they would have harmed the men first. But if somebody came for the cargo, or removed the witnesses, a child would have been the greatest risk, because a child grows up, and children remember things in pictures, not words, images, fragments, things that haunt silently in the mind. Which means if Sophia was taken, it is quite possible she did not die. She may have lived, somewhere, under another name, hidden, changed. In 1913, a woman named Eleanor Spooner was examined in an asylum in Boston. She was wandering the harbor, speaking of a big wooden house that was never still and always sang. She repeated saying, "My name is Sophia, but not Sophia now." No identification records survived, but the staff mentioned something odd. She was terrified of open water, but obsessed with old ships. She had burned her own fingers with alcohol, saying, "I had to see if it was real." No family claimed her body when she died. She had no official past, just a borrowed name. H. The secret report to Washington. In 1883, an unsigned report was delivered to the War Department. It contained the phrase, "The incident of the Celeste has proved the transportation method successful. And below it, the most disturbing sentence of all. Crews will no longer be required in Phase 2. What did that mean? Crews were never required again? Was the plan to transition to untraceable, unmanned supply routes? Supply of what? Human life, chemicals, weapons the world wasn't ready for. That same year, American naval budgets increased significantly, with no explanation to Congress. Coincidence? History doesn't tend to believe in coincidences. Something beneath the ship. Modern sonar scans of the seafloor where the Mary Celeste once drifted revealed something strange. A long, thin metal structure buried under sediment. Not a shipwreck, not natural rock. Too straight, too uniform, too deliberate. Under further scanning, a pattern of platforms became visible, almost like a small underwater station. But this was the 1800s. Who built underwater structures then? And why was one placed directly below the path of a ship whose crew vanished? The report was quickly sealed, and nothing more was said. And the silence continues. Mary Celeste was repaired. She sailed again, but every owner who purchased her met financial ruin, madness, or sudden death. In 1885, the final captain deliberately destroyed her on a reef for insurance money. But even then, she did not go easily. Wood refused to break. Iron refused to snap. Locals described hearing what sounded like screaming timber long after the wreck, as if the ship itself remembered everything and did not forgive. Not the men who left her, not the men who used her, and not the history that tried to forget her. Part 3. The Men Who Existed Only on Paper. By the time the 20th century arrived, the Mary Celeste had already been turned into a legend, a ghost story told to wide-eyed cadets and bored tavern drinkers. Her name became shorthand for mystery itself. But behind the folklore, behind the exaggerated rumors of sea monsters and curses, something far more structured had taken shape. A pattern. And patterns belong not to ghosts, but to plans. Plans require planners, and planners require organizations, which meant someone, somewhere, had turned the disappearance of the Mary Celeste from an incident to a method. 1. The man who refused to let it die. In 1921, a journalist and former war correspondent named Ezekiel Graves arrived in Gibraltar. He had cover stories, fake credentials, and the kind of curiosity that had already gotten 3 of his colleagues killed under unusual circumstances in Europe. Officially, he was writing a book on naval myths. Unofficially, he had found fragments of something in French and British intelligence archives that pointed again and again toward one place name that did not appear on any normal map: the Null Corridor. He became obsessed with it. Old sailors laughed at him. Old officers ignored him. But one old clerk at a British Admiralty office gave him the first real clue. She slid a yellowed folder across a desk and whispered, "These men were never meant to be remembered." Inside were partial names, half photos, and payroll records for sailors that never officially served on any vessel. And yet, they were paid. They had ranks. They had missions. One name was circled in red ink. Thomas H. Weir, Navigation Specialist, 1872. The same year as the Mary Celeste. But Weir was not on the Celeste crew list. He never served in public records. He did not exist, except here. 2. A name that should not have survived. Following Weir's payments, Graves discovered something more disturbing. Weir's family had filed for a missing persons report in 1873. The response from authorities was brief. No records indicate the service or existence of a Thomas Weir in any naval capacity. Case closed. But in private shipping documents, a line item in a coded account registered under an unknown shell company read, "Payment completed for W controller involvement, Phase Celeste." Phase Celeste. For the first time, the ship was directly connected to something larger, something official, yet erasing itself from history at the same time. Graves realized this wasn't a ghost ship story. It was a test run. 3. Phase 2, The Invisible Fleets. From fragments recovered across old ports in Boston, Halifax, Lisbon, and Liverpool, Graves constructed a terrifying outline. After Mary Celeste, several countries quietly began cooperating, not with parliaments or public knowledge, but through private contractors, shipping magnates, and intelligence brokers. The goal: to move people, materials, and information across the ocean without using official fleets. No flags, no logs, no nation. If a ship vanished, it would never be missed. No government would have to answer. This was the birth of what modern intelligence agencies would later call plausible deniability. And the Null Corridor was its first highway. Dozens of old shipping routes led inward toward that unclaimed zone in the Atlantic, almost like a funnel. Everything pointed toward a center, and something waited at that center. 4. The survivor nobody believed. In 1922, a man walked barefoot into a small harbor town in Nova Scotia. His clothes were rotted, his beard silver white, his hands covered in old scars. He spoke broken English, mixed with something unrecognizable. The only clear words anyone understood were, "The wooden mother did not sink. She delivered us." For weeks, the townspeople thought he was insane, until he drew something in the dirt. A ship, and under it, an impossible shape. Not a rock, not a fish, but a mechanical structure beneath the water. Platforms, beams, spirals. A hidden underwater station. He pointed to one side and raspy whispered, "They took them down, not east, not west, down, down." He died 2 days later from exposure and exhaustion. Local authorities burned his drawings, saying they were the work of madness. But one child who watched him draw would later become an engineer, and he never forgot what he saw in that dirt. 5. The first quiet technology of the Cold War. After World War I and just before World War II, governments rushed to dominate unseen territory, not just land, but information. Historical records show the U.S., UK, and Germany were heavily investing in underwater research even in the 1930s. Officially, submarines. Unofficially, stations. Untraceable bases in meaningless spaces. Hidden corridors. Places where experiments could be conducted. Prisoners could disappear. Technology could develop without laws. Identities could be erased. When these secret budgets were backdated, Graves found a strange trend. The very first of those financial lines began in 1873, the year after the Mary Celeste vanished. Almost like what happened then showed them something possible, something valuable, something terrifying. 6. And then the photographs. In 1923, while in Lisbon, Graves was contacted anonymously. He was given a sealed envelope and told, "If you want the truth, do not let the sea see this." Inside were 3 black and white photographs, faded, grainy, taken from the deck of an unknown ship. In the first, he saw the open Atlantic, Nothing special. In the second, something rose from the sea in the distance, a circular, metallic structure barely visible above the waves. And in the third, the Mary Celeste was docked beside it, not drifting, docked, rope lines attached to something not visible on any map. And on the deck, tiny figures could be seen, walking, alive, not prisoners, not panicked, but calm, as if controlled. If the photo was real, then the Mary Celeste was never abandoned. It was received. 7. The last known words of Graves. Graves mailed copies of his findings to 2 universities and 1 newspaper. None ever published them. Weeks later, his boarding house bedroom was found open, window open, chair knocked over, papers gone. No signs of struggle. Just 1 sentence written on the wall beside the desk, scratched by what looked like a penknife.
The sea does not keep the secret. Men do. He was never seen again. His passport turned up in Buenos Aires, then Cairo, then vanished permanently. Some believe he was silenced. Others believe he was recruited. Either way, his voice disappeared. Just like the crew of the Mary Celeste. 8. But secrets have echoes. Decades later, during the Cold War, newly trained CIA operatives were asked a strange question in training. Where do things go that officially never happened? The expected answer was nowhere. But the classified correct answer, found in a 1987 leaked manual, was the null. Null, meaning 0, meaning absence, meaning erased, meaning the same word that once marked the Atlantic zone beneath the drifting Mary Celeste, which meant the technology, the idea, the corridor. It had never been abandoned, only perfected, updated, hidden better. 9. And the ship's final whisper. Even after her destruction, pieces of the Mary Celeste's wood were collected by locals. Years later, some were tested. They showed abnormal traces of substances not found in any natural environment of the 1800s. Unknown metal particles, unusual radiation exposure, chemical preservation beyond normal aging. It was as if the ship had passed through something. Not violent, not natural, but advanced. A doorway, a meeting, a threshold, a system that existed outside the recorded world. 10. The question that still remains. The greatest mystery is no longer what happened to the Mary Celeste. It is now, how many others followed her? How many invisible ships crossed that corridor? How many people crossed with them? How many never returned? How much of modern intelligence, warfare, and technology was built in a place erased from maps by a ship found accidentally drifting in silence? By a child who may have survived? By men who existed only on paper? By a sea that remembers everything and forgives nothing?
Part 4. The Corridor That Refused to Die. By the mid-20th century, the Atlantic had changed. Radar charts mapped it, satellites watched it, and nuclear submarines stalked its depths. The world believed the oceans were finally known. But the null corridor never appeared on any official chart. Not because it had moved, but because it had been removed. The greatest trick of the modern age was not invisibility. It was convincing the world that there was nothing to see. And that is where the real story of the Mary Celeste becomes something far bigger than a 19th century maritime mystery. Because she did not vanish. She was the first to cross, and others followed. 1. The birth of a second triangle. In the 1950s, American newspapers began reporting mysterious disappearances of planes and ships near Florida and the Atlantic. They called it the Bermuda Triangle. Pilots spoke of compasses spinning, skies turning white, instruments failing, a feeling of falling upward, time vanishing from clocks. But buried inside a declassified defense memo from 1957 was a chilling line. Triangle events appear to be a drift effect from primary corridor instability. Primary corridor, not triangle. The Bermuda Triangle, it seemed, was only a side effect, a ripple caused by something much older, a center point located near the original null zone, the very waters where the Mary Celeste was found. One theory began forming among select military scientists. What if the ocean wasn't hiding a monster, but a door? 2. Post-war experiments. No one was meant to survive. After World War II, governments became obsessed with three things: control, transportation, and silence. Thousands of German scientists were secretly brought to the United States through Operation Paperclip. Officially, they were there to help with rockets and medicine. Unofficially, they were there to help with dimensional physics and deep-water engineering. A strange collection of notes from one scientist, Dr. Wilhelm Kessler, was recovered decades later. He wrote, "The ocean is not water alone. In certain coordinates, it becomes membrane. The Celeste crossed a soft point. Membrane, like skin, like a thin wall between two spaces." He believed the Mary Celeste accidentally drifted across a naturally occurring dimensional thinning point, and someone had discovered it, and then built around it. 3. The man who claimed he was transferred. In 1963, a disoriented man appeared on the shore of Azores. He wore clothing that looked decades old. He had no ID. His fingerprints were incomplete. In questioning, he said one sentence over and over: "I worked on a ship that never returned, but I did."
He described being taken underwater, brought into white metal rooms, tested, shown lights that made him forget his own name, forced to sign papers he could not read, taught numbers and codes instead of language. When asked what year he believed it was, he replied, 1873. Doctors labeled him delusional, but there was a problem. The man showed no signs of aging beyond 30, and carbon analysis of his clothing dated it to the late 1800s. He disappeared from medical custody 2 nights later. Room empty, sheets folded, door locked from the inside. Only a damp footprint left behind, as though someone walked him back into the sea. 4. A quiet federal classification. In 1972, exactly 100 years after the Mary Celeste incident, the U.S. Navy officially labeled a large Atlantic region as Restricted Research Area 4C. No explanation was given, no press release, just a removal from fishing maps, shipping lanes, and commercial charts. Satellite imagery from that area suddenly showed heavy static and distortion. Even today, if you search those coordinates, almost every satellite service blurs, shifts, or misaligns the image. That alone should terrify you, because satellites don't lose focus. They are told where not to look. 5. The final paper trail, Sophia's possible identity. In 1998, genealogist experts discovered a strange anomaly. A woman named Sophia Eleanor Whitmore, born 1870 but registered in 1891, had a government-created social identity. And her birthplace? At sea. Her children later claimed she never spoke of her childhood. Just once before her death in 1939, she held a piece of driftwood embedded in metal and whispered, "I was not meant to return." She had a strange mark on her wrist, not a scar, a symbol. The same symbol was later recovered on a piece of wreckage confirmed to have belonged to the Mary Celeste. A matching mark, a matching memory. A matching silence. 6. Evidence of activity today. In 2012, an independent research vessel sailing through the central Atlantic reported sudden power drain, brief disappearance from radar for 17 seconds, hearing scraping below the hull, an unexplained light beneath the water. They captured a thermal image before systems failed. It showed a cold, elongated shape directly below them. Not a living creature, not geology, but a structure emitting organized energy. The coordinates? Within 30 miles of the Celeste recovery location, within the edge of the null zone, within the shadow of history's greatest erased secret. The files were seized. The crew was ordered to remain silent under national security threat, and the footage vanished. 7. What this means and why it matters. The biggest questions now are no longer about a single ship. They are about how long has this corridor existed? Was it discovered or created? What is transferred through it? Who controls it? And most haunting of all, why was the Mary Celeste chosen to be the first? Not the biggest ship, not the fastest, not the most important, just a quiet vessel, a faithful captain, a young child, and an ocean that knew more than it revealed. Maybe that is how secrets always begin, not with power, but with silence.
And the final whisper. There is one last detail buried in recorded weather logs from the day the Mary Celeste was found drifting. Sailors on the Dei Gratia reported an early morning fog that lifted upward instead of fading. Fog does not lift upward. It dissolves. But this fog, it rose, like something opening or closing.
Part 5. Final. The silence that followed the earthquake. The bombs had stopped falling. For the first time in years, London slept without the thunder of German aircraft rippling across the sky. No sirens wailed. No children ran for shelters. No anti-aircraft guns chewed the night into ribbons of fire. And yet, the silence that followed was heavier than war. In Berlin, a city that once declared it would stand for 1,000 years, smoke drifted through shattered avenues like a ghost that had forgotten how to leave. The Reichstag was a carcass of stone. The Brandenburg Gate, a monument of power, stood broken, as if even architecture had learned humility. Adolf Hitler was dead. The war was over. But history, as it always does, was only beginning to reveal its true form. In the United States, celebrations swept across the nation. People kissed in the streets of New York. Church bells rang for hours in the Midwest. Factory whistles screamed in victory. Soldiers returned to parades, and strangers shook hands as if they were family. Yet, inside the deepest layers of the American government, there was no celebration, only calculation, only silence, only a new map spread across a long table in a secret room. A map of the world, divided by fear. One half tinted red, the other marked blue. On one side, the United States of America. On the other, the Soviet Union. They had been allies. Now they were rivals. And what they were racing toward was not land. It was power, capable of ending civilization. Operation Paperclip, the great American secret. Long before the public knew, American intelligence officers were already inside the ruins of Germany with a list of names, not war criminals to imprison, but scientists to steal. Men who designed rockets that shattered London, engineers who built the Nazi war machine, chemists who developed gases capable of wiping out cities. Among them, Werner von Braun. He had once built weapons for Hitler. Now he would build dreams for America. Hidden under the name Operation Paperclip, the United States quietly smuggled over 1,600 German scientists into America, gave them new identities, new homes, and erased their past. They were moved to Arizona, to Texas, to Alabama. They were given laboratories instead of prison cells, and with their knowledge came something terrible and something magnificent. The technology that destroyed Europe would one day send Americans to the moon. History never admits this cleanly, but this was the deal with the devil America made to defeat a new one. While America built rockets, Russia built shadows. In 1949, the world changed with a soundless shock. The USSR detonated its first atomic bomb. A mushroom cloud bloomed over Kazakhstan, and suddenly America was no longer alone in ultimate power. President Harry Truman held the report with a pale hand. America had imagined monopoly. Now it faced annihilation. From that day forward, every child in America grew up under an invisible clock, the doomsday clock.
Schools taught children to hide under desks. Cities built nuclear fallout shelters. Families stocked canned food for an end that could come in minutes. The Cold War did not need battles, only fear. An invisible war. A war that almost ended the world more than once. 1962, 13 days from apocalypse. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Russian nuclear missiles discovered just 90 miles from Florida. President John F. Kennedy stared at photographs taken from a U-2 spy plane. His generals suggested immediate airstrikes. His citizens went about their days unaware they were minutes from extinction. Soviet ships moved toward Cuban shores. American ships blocked them. Finger hovered over the button. A submarine officer named Vasily Arkhipov refused to fire a nuclear torpedo despite orders. His single decision may have saved the human race. History never put his name on a monument, but your life may exist because of him. The race to the moon, beauty born from fear. Space was never just exploration, it was dominance. Rockets that could reach the moon could also reach Moscow or Washington in 30 minutes. But in 1969, the race changed tone. Neil Armstrong stepped on alien dust and spoke softly. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. A former Nazi scientist stood in the control room, tears in his eyes, watching a Saturn V rocket he designed pierce the heavens. Earth watched on black and white televisions. For the first time, humanity saw itself as a tiny blue ball floating in infinite darkness. And for a moment, there were no borders. But back on Earth, history demanded more blood. Vietnam, a jungle whore fueled by ideology. 58,220 American soldiers would never come home. Villages burned, civilians screamed, soldiers aged decades in months. Photographs published in American newspapers turned citizens into protesters. Young Americans burned draft cards and shouted to end a war they no longer believed in. For the first time, the American people began to question their own government. Trust shattered. In 1974, even the president, Richard Nixon, resigned in disgrace. History had begun holding leaders accountable. Walls, spies, and the night they fell. Berlin was split in half by a concrete scar called the Berlin Wall. Families waved at each other across barbed wire for nearly 30 years. Then, in 1989, people with hammers ended an empire. Concrete fell, tears flowed, the Cold War collapsed. The Soviet Union dissolved into history. America had won, but victory left a question. What does the world's only superpower become next? September 11th, 2001, the day the sky fell. 4 airplanes, 19 men, 2,996 lives. Steel towers fell like paper. America watched in disbelief as the unthinkable became reality. From that day forward, the world changed again. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, surveillance on a global scale, security at every airport, fear embedded into everyday life. History now moved at the speed of terror and technology, and the battlefield was no longer just land. It was information. The final realization. After all the wars, the scientists, the presidents, the bombs, the betrayals and treaties, one truth became clear. History was never truly about nations. It was about choices. Small decisions made by individuals that shaped the fate of millions. A soldier who refused an order. A scientist who shared a formula. A pilot who pulled back. A leader who walked away from violence. Civilizations do not fall from one disaster. They fall from a series of choices, and they rise the same way. Today, the story is now yours. You are not just a reader, you are a continuation. The same forces that shaped Rome, Berlin, London, Washington, and Moscow still exist. Power, fear, hope, greed, courage. And one day, someone will study this era and wonder, who chose peace? Who chose profit? Who tried to warn the world? The final pages of history have not yet been written. They are being typed right now by every decision made by every human walking this earth. And somewhere, years from now, a voice will begin another story with the words, "It began quietly, after the great silence of the past." And that reader will have no idea that this was never just a story. It was a warning. It was a lesson. It was a mirror. And it was real.